Okay. Hey, everyone. It's Misery Loves Company. If you're watching this for the first time, this is a Zoom reading series hosted by Misery Tourism. Every week we have readings from, what's the term I use? Outsider and transgressive writers. And every week it's new work. Every week it's generally new authors. And yeah, the hell with it. Let's get going here. So first up tonight is Daniel. Oh, also, anything that's read, if I have a link to it, I'll put it in the chat, and I'll also put it up on Twitter. So, Daniel, you're up first.
All right. Okay, great. Well, this is a excerpt from this like existential novel that I wrote. This existential horror novel called Lord of Chaos, and it's kind of like steeped in my obsession with delusions, in particular Capgras syndrome and Cotard syndrome. So here we go. A blinding whiteness, no, not blinding as such, but insurmountable in its immensity. We are able to look away from it. Our movement is restricted. It hurts us, but there is nothing we can do but look into its brilliance. Days pass, perhaps weeks or months, gazing into the gaping lightness, wondering if its strength is breaking us apart, deciding whether or not we are even everything, trying to move and receiving no response. Perhaps hours pass or minutes. With great effort, we try to look away, but it's of little use. For either there is only this blinding whiteness or our signals are ignored. Then we notice slowly at first, but more rapidly in time, the lightness begins to dim. There is a scraping all around, and it dims even more until all that can be seen is a sort of blur behind a white screen in a white room by a white bed, housing what we imagine to be a white limb, a part of us, although we're still being ignored, our limbs refusing to respond to our signals. But in reality, the room, the glowing orb behind the screen, and especially ourselves, are more yellow than anything really. Especially our skin, it's sallow, almost green. Our limb, our arm it is. It looks like rotten tree limb stripped of bark. Then a face looms into our vision, or what would be a face, had it any recognizable features. Where the eye should be is covered in skin. The mouth too, although it looks as if the face does indeed have a mouth that's wide open in an O shape. But that too has been soldered over with light pink flesh. The nasal cavity is but a pixelated blur, an optical illusion. The entire face resembling something just barely out of focus. We are at once fascinated and horrified. The face looming over us begins to speak. It repeats its requests over and over again and eventually recedes from our field of vision, leaving us once again in the sallow glow of wherever we reside. Then the face returns, but is another face entirely. It appears exactly the same, out of focus, features smoothed over with pink skin, but its requests are posed to us in a different timbre. Given away their difference from the previous faceless being, our range of view tilts jerkily forward, only for a moment. We see in front of us a man we recognize, at least by his looks, but is not the man we know. He's sitting in a chair. Our vision is returned to the way it was before, only slightly elevated from its previous height. The faceless being says other things, and then, again, our vision is elevated jerkily. When the faceless being unclasps us, we see in front of us our body in a bed with white linens, the man thing residing in the distance with a look of faint concern. Two faceless ones remove the first linen, peppered with excretions and viscera, and throw these soiled pieces in a cart nearby, then remove our clothing. Our sallow yellow arm, the rest of our frame appears depleted, a poorly constructed effigy, a corpse. There's nothing that can return us. The man thing in front of us we've never known. He's an imposter. It's a good likeness, although we've never spoken. Yet there it is, refusing to leave our side. Once the caretakers have finished reapplying the formaldehyde that keeps us in this petrified state, It, the man thing, will leave momentarily, then return, carrying a tray laden with foodstuffs to force down our throat. Taste is an idea long forgotten. However, the imposter, with the help of the caretakers, is persistent in prying our jaw open to funnel a soft, putrid sauce inside us. When it tires of this task and returns to its seat, then leaves, the glow masked by the screen recedes into darkness, and a series of encounters occur. We find ourselves floating in a room inhabited by a man in white. It's full of jars containing items we cannot eat. We hover close by, but never once is the man in white alerted to our presence. It is a relief, for we know we're not supposed to witness the event. This room, where the man in white works ceaselessly, is not supposed to exist for us. It's a scene we've somehow infiltrated. Our forays into the forbidden zone are brief, but when we're allowed to linger, this is what we see. The man in white slowly plucking items out of the jars that line every shelf and corner of the room. There is no visible exit. Every area is overwhelmed with the preserved parts of different beings, housed in the substance that halts decay and enables them to be reattached, fully functional when he deems it necessary. He is a builder itching at perfection, yet failing repeatedly. He arranges the items, some familiar, others unworldly, into outrageous combinations, sewing each one together, sometimes creating something resembling a human, others a strange and hideous chimera. But he's never satisfied with the end result. He casts the creatures out or takes them apart and rearranges them. Some become helpers, others fodder for the trash heaps from whence they came. During these visits, we're drawn to understanding his idea of perfection, for it's well beyond our perception of the word. He's sculpting a new meaning by warping it into a self, contained, entirely new ideal, poised in a frame with the ancient bone needle, slowly threading through the sense of things. We know that too, somewhere amidst all the jars in some distant corner sits a piece of ourselves, our piece. And with each failed being, he comes closer to extracting it, adding it to a history, the one he'll create with a piece of us, illustrating our future and in what realm we'll spend eternity, for we are part of his perfection. Prior to being interred in the blinding white room, we were situated in a place without doors or windows, with nothing but empty cupboards. It was there we learned to starve. And out of doors was always comfortable, raining or snowing, unpleasant and encapsulated in gloom. Before the imposter, there was the man, robotic in his duties. He left every day to go somewhere, for that we are certain. But where or for whom and to what specific end we've altogether forgotten by now, or never knew in the first place. We've forgotten that as well. It's unimportant. Soup stretched into every meal, thinning entirely until becoming nothing more than the idea of itself. Back then, we refused to leave the house, adorned in shreds and tattered as it was, our frame, for lack of new clothes, a single solid jacket with which to hide the filth we were draped in. Of course, if you'd have asked anybody else, they'd tell you we were no worse off than the next. Some even that we were lucky, liars, all of them. Our troubles began when we were thrown from the train. From that day forward, we began to disappear. It was our hair that went first. Each day we'd rise to find more and more thatches come away in the brush until nothing but a few stubborn patches remained, dry and coarse like straw. But when we were thrown from the train, I say we, but really I mean myself, we were damaged. It's been ever since then, our problems. Spent everything on a cure, but found none. The doctors emptied our pockets and exacerbated our claims by their disingenuous profferings and good cheer, when they easily read our future suffering in the tattered leaves of clothing with which we painted our diminishing frames. They just shook us by the pants till every penny hit the floor. But he was more naive, so he had quite a time of it. No wonder he was so easily replaced. The thing in front of us now, wherever we are, was beside us when our teeth began to fall out. There was a day when I suspected something, but was too afraid to say. We had each selected a pair of boots to be boiled, along with the belts we had. That and a few handfuls of grass and some salt begged from neighbors. Shortly afterwards, I plucked my teeth out one by one. Most were rotted anyways, but a few, the ones anchored far in the back, were big, white and shiny, like the light reflecting off of a serpent's hide. Once all the teeth had left us, the imposter nestled in. I saw him beforehand, round about the area. I stayed quiet about it at first, unsure whether it was just a vision or something that had passed, like the headaches. But I'd seen him sneaking about the shack, disappearing around a corner after I'd just come outside. I'd make chase, but it was always too late. The bugger was quicker than I could account for. I began to think he was messing with us somehow. I'd woke one morning to find half a cord of wood missing. I spoke up about it, and my partner said he'd loaned it to our neighbors, who were too elderly to chop their own. I started suspecting that he'd already been replaced. For safekeeping, I'd save our teeth in jars by the windowsill. One day I walked by the window and noticed mine were missing. I suspected something foul and confronted him about it. He said, "Don't you remember?" "Remember what?" I asked. "You took them out and buried them," he said, "to grow a tooth plant in the yard." Can you believe that? The thought of such a thing, and that he had the brass bedpost to suggest I'd come up with it is absurd. "Where did I bury them?" I shouted. He shrugged and went out and didn't return until well after dark. He stole my teeth. They hold a sort of power, things like that do, and he spent the evening working some strange machinations to further our deterioration, or hasten it rather. When he came home, I was waiting to confront him. I asked him where he was and what he was doing. It was all too easy to see the mask he wore. It tore so easily, came away beneath our fingernails without resistance. We were unable to help ourselves. Shrieking, he did his best to cover his face with his hands, but the damage was done. That poorly made pink and pockmarked mask couldn't have convinced a child of its authenticity. If our teeth hadn't already fallen out, we would have bit him once more, for good measure. He managed to run away and lock himself in the pantry, hiding like a frightened rabbit, from which he didn't emerge for several days. I screamed at him through the door. I was still angry. I didn't have any regrets, although I have to admit the act was quite convincing. Throughout the duration of his stay in the pantry, I remained near the door in case he made an effort to escape. But I lapsed in vigilance one evening, and when I awoke, he, or it, was gone. At that point, I thought it best to get the law involved and called to make a report. But the imbecilic operator kept placing me on hold, asking to repeat myself. After a few minutes of back and forth, we'd given up entirely and simply screamed, "Our partner has been replaced," then slammed the headset down in fury. Several minutes later, a group of men burst through the door. I explained the imposter had fled, but they seemed unable to understand me. "It's out there somewhere," I shouted, gesturing with my hands. It was then I realized, in all the commotion, I'd forgotten to wash. A thick particulate of skin, hair, and blood was caked beneath our fingernails. The men didn't seem interested in what I had to say. I was too weak to put up much of a fight when they fell upon me and wrapped me up into a sort of plastic, then transported me to the death chamber. This blinding whiteness consumes us, devouring our individuality. It's insurmountable. Unable to move, our history is slowly usurped. What is the day once past if you are dead? We remain stationary at all times in wonder of the light. We haven't the signals necessary to make our requests heard. These faceless beings make it impossible. There are occasions when it seems we've approached some sort of understanding. They mutter and walk away, then return. moving her stiff and yellow body this way and that, reapplying the death solution to prevent us from further decay. A plastic doll interned in the house of the infirm. When we leave off consciousness to observe the architect, we're also on display. The living pass through slowly and curiously to catch a small glimpse of the living dead in the room where we're installed. The glowing orb, the only sense of the passing of things. Without it, we'd be locked in never-ending light or darkness while our faces shoveled with bittersweet slop. Somewhere far back is the recognition that twins us with the memory of taste, this taste, the one in the room, but it's too diminished. Only an idea of unpleasantness. How can the dead taste, you ask? To which I can only reply and answer that we haven't all the answers. Solely the story by which we've lived and died. There's a scraping all around us. The orb dims and we're left with a blur behind the white screen, the color of the room, the same as the pieces of cloth which coat our septic limbs. We remain frozen, sending signals into the ether, the transistor of the dead acting upon its own accord. There is again a looming presence, a featureless face where the feature of the face should be, a thin slice of flesh for the mouth, resembling the shape of an O, slightly recessed like the top of a pudding cup, as if one could easily punch it open or shove their fingers through it to find a pink tongue to grip, 2 rows of teeth, transistors in great contrast to our rotting limbs, which retain a soft, greenish yellow hue to play the live bark's essence. The nasal cavity of the featureless beings, nothing more than a pixelated blur. The imagining of form coming slowly into focus, walking in and out of our field of vision before we're able to adjust to the image completely. The sallow glow of our intermittent echoing as the orb recedes, leaving us alone with our imposter, donning a new mask after we shredded the last one they'd given him 2 bits. The orb lessens its glow, receding back into its singular reality. We can see the workshop now, even as we speak, or think rather, or whatever the manner in which our thoughts are organized. Surrounded by the pickled members of 1,000 species sits the architect of reality, bow needle poised, feverishly composing a new set of coordinates, precisely placing each piece before activation. The area where he's encapsulated thrums with a vibrant greenish glow. Jars leave their places on the shelf and float before him, hovering there until, upon closer inspection, he realizes they don't contain the items he needs and sends them back to their darkened corners. Somewhere in those racks is a piece of us, the only living piece that survives. It was taken to his workshop after being sliced away. In darkness, the architect sends out helpers who scour the human waste of old folks' homes and hospitals, extracting their parts and specimens before the staff carts them off in secret to the rendering plants. When they cut away my rotten parts, they spoke as if doing me a favor. They said they'd found a growth that couldn't be extracted without removing the entirety of my chest. So one day my partner, this was prior to his replacement, dragged me off to the house of the infirm and they cut off my tits. We watched as the architect moves closer and closer to our nasty bits. He sorts through each floating member in front of him like it's a puzzle game on a touch screen, getting closer and closer. The place where our pieces once were has begun to throb, to pulsate beneath our dirty sheets. We remain unable to look down and see for ourselves, but take comfort in the knowledge that soon it will begin to glow and spread, this toxic light emanating from where they cut us up and sewed us back together again. It's undulating like a shock in the ocean. We can feel it and it feels good to feel after so long. It's traveling and powerful. The architect reaches for one jar, taps it with the tip of his finger, sends it back into the noxious green shade of the limb shelves. How does he leave this place, we wonder, as there seems to be no exit. It seems as though he never ceases to work, so it's possible he never leaves. But the beings he constructs and casts aside are sent upon errands in the night, so there must be a way. Our body shakes and judders. We float above his workbench, eyes peeled. The architect twists the cap loose of one of the jars in front of him, letting its contents spill out upon the thick steel operating table. The room in white grows ever blinding as our body sheds its layers. The faceless beings approach and begin to force feed us with the garbage sauce. Upon the architect's table is a revelation. Amidst the glop and goo that house the pieces, the one they've taken from us, we watch as the architect slowly and carefully lifts one, plying its softness, passing it from one hand to the other. He picks up the other piece of us lying on the table, the slickness of which glints softly in the gaseous light. The architect holds our cancerous breasts in his hands as the faceless ones ram a feeding tube down our throat and pump gallons of applesauce into our mouth. He stitches the two breasts together, making them whole again, and places them there in a corner of the table. The architect leans back and cracks his oversized knuckles, and the faceless beings continue pumping their bittersweet compound deep inside our gut. The architect recedes from vision now, leaving us in awe, wondering what he will sew our cancerous breasts onto and how to escape from this raunchy palace of the dead. This light inside us continues to grow, glowing outwards and scorching all our captors with a sallow brilliance like that of a septic child. A thought freezes the faceless being, ramming our face full of sauce, and a low guttural scream issues forth from somewhere inside it, growing in frequency until the small flap of flesh covering their O mouth vibrates like an eardrum. The architect pauses for a moment over his work, then continues. The skin covering the O mouth burns away, spreading apart like a single spark, igniting a thin strip of film. Oh, the O, it's spreading wider and wider, consuming the faceless features of the one before us until, with a final shuddering and cracking, all we see before us is an open portal in varying shades of darkness, undulating to match the frequency of our once cancerous chest, while the architect elsewhere fingers and sews our breasts to something wholly different. We vibrate violently and can feel ourselves, pieces being broken apart, and essence being sucked into the portal in front of us, dissolving atomic particles being filled from one reality to the next. And in this moment, our vision fades and dissolves as our particle is finally consumed and transported into the darkened frontal void space. And that's it.
Wow.
Whoa.
I
What an opener.
Yeah, right? I love that piece. I loved it when you sent it to us, and I love that we got the opportunity to publish it. I'm like fascinated by unreliable narrators, like, and I love pieces that really, really take you inside a like diseased and delusional mind. And I think that piece, it's like psychological, like transportation, right? You fully occupy that mind, and you can see glimpses of their delusion. You can see glimpses of reality, and every once in a while you say, oh, this is what's happening, right? But like you so fully occupy that space that it like consumes you. I love it. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, I definitely love that one for the reasons William said, and also I get strong like Lateralis vibes, like the Tool album and the the video is particular. I mean that really takes you to a place, definitely.
Yeah, really incredible imagery. Like, that's all I want to say.
I've never said this before, but I'm glad I was muted because for that. It was really good.
So, Sam is up next, I believe. Are you with us still, Sam?
Yeah, wait, from last week?
Yeah, you had sent me a piece last week that you wanted to read, and then you weren't able to make it last week, right?
Oh yeah, I can do that. I mean,
Oh, okay.
I forgot about it.
Oh, okay. I'll put the link in the chat. It was recently published on Expat, right?
Not super recently, but Yeah, I think last fall.
It's like a few years ago, I think.
Wow, time flies.
No, I think that was like last October.
6 years ago.
That was like 10 years ago, dude. It's really purple. I'm finding it right now. So it's called a monolinguloid. I was trying to learn Greek and then I sucked at it and gave up. The doves of my Virgil don't float and then carry over one another, tarry and carry farther, only to be floated away on an invisible stream. My Achilles is not the lion, whose mane is crowned crimson in the blood of Hector, nor is he the sinister spider, weaving his fate as he weaves round his final prey. The temptress nymphs tempt far less when my Odysseus is tied to the bow of his ship. Their rhythm, the alien allure of their faraway magic, is a shade of a shade and a drug. These works are the works of that distant sun. They are not the sunbeams particulate, whirring unabandoned and uninhibited through an absolute vacuum, except from the minute draw of me, hold closer as the distance of origin draws farther and farther, and telegraphed vector becomes intellical arc, until finally it crashes into its greatest desire, then scatters and collides and entangles and happily communes with its brethren who made the same journey to illumine signs in my world. That's it.
Oh yeah.
I love the cadence of that piece. And I really enjoyed your delivery of it as well. And I think it's funny, that it's about language, and that it's about speech, that kind of like mythic recasting of something like as basic as being, monolingual. I don't know. I really love the imagery. I really love the structure and the cadence of it.
Okay.
Yeah, Samuel's like one of the most unique writers right now. Everything he sends me is just like, I can't imagine anyone else now writing it. I guess it's all the philosophy you read.
Yeah, I was reading Proust when I wrote that.
Oh yeah?
Kind
Okay.
of ripping him off. Well, no, I just finished Proust, but I think I was kind of.
You read all the books that I pretend to have read. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good answer.
I think I have Damien up next, but I'm not sure if Damien's with us.
What is just a second ago?
Oh, Damien?
Yeah,
are you
I'm
here?
fine now. I always
Oh,
had a
cool.
migraine and it's passed.
Cool.
Oh,
My
good.
microphone works, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we can hear
Oh,
you.
yeah,
clearly.
yeah.
Okay. Okay, I was really debating which one I wanted to read, which part, but fuck it.
And you're going to be reading an excerpt from your upcoming novel, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, which will be dropping like very soon. Like I think there'll be an interview up on the website like next week. So and we're expecting the final layout like any day now. So
Oh man, awesome. So is that something that might be out before the end of the year or maybe early next year or?
no, we're hoping to get it out like in a few weeks.
Oh shit, just in time
Yeah,
for
man,
Halloween, huh?
Hopefully, yeah. Yeah, we're trying to get it. We're like, I mean, it's a lot, but we're hoping to like blitz the rest of the year after like a long summer of inertia.
How thick is it?
I was telling like Dale how I thought it was funny when his book dropped. He did an interview where he talked about like the novelty of the COVID situation and like how like futuristic it was. He got to like hang out with his friends online, and like how that seems like a million years ago. Like the novelty it wore thin in like a month. And then Fucked Up was supposed to be our book of the summer, but there's a lot of work. It's like Eris said, it's super thick.
Ooh, is it thick though?
It's thick, yeah.
Ooh.
It is. It's thick and
Both with like both the C's and the CK. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent.
Mm-hmm. I guess
I
I'll
love
start.
us.
What was it?
I love us.
Oh, okay.
sweet.
So yeah, there's like the first part of this, and then there's a second part. First part is by the protagonist. The second part is like something this character writes. Okay. Sherry Rose's novel is entitled I Could Never Love You More Than I Do Now and is divided into 3 chapters. The first chapter goes into detail about her sexual encounters with a blogger who may or may have not raped an autistic 14-year-old girl. This part mostly consists of emails that they exchange and some of her poorly written, self-hating minimalist poetry. The second chapter is about her brother and the events leading up to his suicide. Rose's brother lived his life descending a staircase of extreme depression due to his parents' inability to ever show him the love and care that he needed. In this chapter, Rose and her brother exchange written letters and their loneliness and attempt to comfort each other. Her words come off much more forceful than his. You can tell that she only wrote back because she felt that she had to. In chapter 3, Sherry writes about her brother's friend that committed suicide a few months earlier on, his influence on her brother's suicide, and then over 50 pages of over-the-top hatred towards them. An Amazon reviewer, Dying of AIDS 666, had written, Sherry Rose's novel is a self-absorbed pile of narcissistic trash written for an era of writers that call text messages and tweets poetry. Another user argued that the third chapter wasn't meant to come off as pro-suicide or hateful towards a victim of suicide. It was meant to represent her process of mourning the death of her brother and the shame she felt for never taking her brother's depression seriously. But then I must ask, what was the point of the first chapter? Why did she feel the need to share these extremely sexual conversations with the audience when he had no actual correlation to the next 2 chapters? What purpose did the poetry have? Anyone that gives this book more than 3 stars is a fucking dumbass. Fuck you, Sherry. I found a download link for her book on a Russian forum and read it in about 2 hours. After I had finished it, I moved the document into the trash bin icon on the top left side of my computer and looked at some prolapse porn until Connor came over. The reviewer has some thoughtful points, but I couldn't help but keep repeating the title in my head while reading the novel. I'd like to state that the first chapter was written while she was writing letters to her brother in the second chapter, so maybe she included it to humiliate herself to the reader. Maybe she wrote this book to degrade herself for never giving a shit about her brother and partly causing his suicide. I can't help but feel empathetic towards her, but maybe my opinion is skewed because I fucked her. She doesn't seem to judge me for how fucked up I am. Unfortunately, I think her novel is terribly written and poorly put together. I wish I had taken her advice and never read it. A part of me is convincing myself that maybe all that nonsense between us wasn't beautiful and sentimental at all. And this is the part where this other person writes. My most cherished and nostalgic childhood memory is of parachute day in my elementary gym class. It's simple. All the children would grab an end of this enormous rainbow-hued parachute that stretched up halfway across the gymnasium. We would count to 3, a 1, a 2, and a 3, and then we lifted our arms up and quickly sat inside the parachute. A few things happened at this moment. This is my earliest memory of feeling true euphoria, so I think that everything began there. In this euphoria, I saw myself free, although I'm not sure what I need to be free of, being that I've always been a privileged, cisgendered, straight white woman raised from a wealthy family. But I felt that shit, that ecstasy. That second thing came to my mind while I was inside of this dome was a fascination to be encaged inside of it forever, an intense need to spend the rest of my life seeking out pleasure. Everything else would be null and vapid. The next part is strange and probably unnecessary to speak about, but I might as well say it anyway. The belly of the parachute made me eroticize the idea of being imprisoned. I later asked my parents to buy me a bouncy house designed as a prison cell. They just curled their faces into an awkward spiral and laughed at me. But the 8-year-old version of me was serious about it. I wanted to fucking wear an orange jumpsuit and live in a bouncy gray cage. That thought still stays with me because often I disgust myself with my depraved and perverted ideas. And I just wish someone would handcuff me, rape me violently in the back of a police car, and throw my face into a secluded cell with no windows, just a steel bolted door and 3 walls. But not even that would be enough because I've done so much worse. I've manipulated and tortured others out of my own curiosity, out of boredom, because I'm so bored of what the world has to give me. Yosemite bored me. The Northern Lights were stupid. Fuck Niagara Falls. Fuck Savannah, Georgia. Blame my disappointment with the planet on the internet. Blame it on the city life. But there was something else of that inside of that dome that ruptured inside of me. Sitting across from me inside the kaleidoscopic parachute was a boy named Bryce. He was staring at me, frightened, and his tormented baby face turning garnet. And then he yelled out, "Miss Sierra, Estelle is farting again. Miss Sierra, it smells so bad." All the children laughed, stood up, and shook the parachute while Miss Sierra tossed a few rubber chickens at the core of the parachute. For the rest of the gym class, I had nailed my eyeballs on Bryce, the shy, possibly autistic loser, his horn-rimmed glasses, ridiculed by others for his afro of curly hair, the rumored faggot that everyone kicked and punched during recess, and the mystical purple bruises around his arms and neck. God, he made me so fucking hot when I saw him beat his head in with his Yu-Gi-Oh lunchbox and get yelled at by the teacher for his inability to pay attention. Even at 8 years old, I had harbored immorally sexual thoughts. Sometimes I would lay in bed at night and imagine myself arriving at school only to find out Bryce had committed suicide. I didn't even know what suicide was, but I thought it, and it was everything to me. Transcendence. Something inside of me wanted to see him dead, or at least suffering from immense physical pain. Some nights I prayed that he'd get terminal cancer or an infection that consumed his arms and legs. It wasn't until 6th grade that I made my first move on him. We used to pass notes in class because I didn't want anyone to know that I was associating myself with Bryce. He started cutting his wrists, and people saw him shopping at Hot Topic at school. So everyone started calling him an emo faggot. That was cool to me, the people calling him an emo faggot. We met in the science lab. We were supposed to be at lunch. It's sad because Bryce wasn't even ugly anymore, but he was still weak and pathetic, so everyone continued to shit all over his existence regarding of his blooming beauty. We sat down beneath the emergency eye wash station. My ass knocked over a beaker, but it didn't break. He said, "So," and then I said, "What?" It wasn't a question. He didn't want to look at me, but I made him do it anyway. He told me that he was confused. They liked guys, and he didn't know if he liked girls. I pulled off his shorts and grabbed his testicles. He got hard. "Sherry," he whined, "I'm religious." Bryce was still hard. I showed him my vagina and said, "You're bisexual. It means you like men and women." He pulled up his shorts and said, "Oh, yeah," was all I had to say before he got up and left. And after that, we were the best friends and told each other everything, except everything I told him was actually made up bullshit. I just wanted to make him feel better. Not really. I was afraid he'd realize I was only interested in him for sex, and that he would stop talking to me, and then I would never lose my virginity. But he bought into it all because he was gullible, suicidal, and completely fucking retarded. We fucked for the first time and last time in 7th grade outside of the back doors of the school while it was raining heavily, as it's doing now. It was a Catholic school, so we were wearing our required school uniforms. Bryce was fucking terrified and made the same stupid face that he made in that gymnasium. I pulled down my plaid skirt and my transparent G-string and backed myself against the wall and walked him through everything. He looked like he was on the verge of crying the entire time and made as little of an effort as possible to touch any other piece of my skin other than my lips. After he came, I sucked his cock while I fucked with my clit. Bryce won't look at me. He made me feel ugly, which turned me on even more. I made him ejaculate into my eyes, which burnt for the rest of the day. Bryce didn't return to school on the following day. He had dropped off the face of the earth for 3 years. Everyone guessed they must have jumped off a bridge and gotten eaten up by sharks, but a bunch of police officers found his skeleton rotting in an open field somewhere in Houston, Texas. They later found out that he had been abducted by child traffickers and sold to some child killer. Some stupid candle observance went on at our school, and everyone made up these bullshit stories in front of news cameras about how deep their friendship was with Bryce and how compassionate he was with his towards his faith with God. It was horrible. I wanted to go on camera and tell him the truth, tell them about how he fucked outside of school, how he used to always mumble prayers under his breath during class because he wished God would give him a second chance, a better life, friends, a family that would accept him. It was still tragic, even if it was all a joke to everyone else. After he died, I started to buy crack and tar, not because I was in grief over his death. I didn't care that he was dead. At some point, I just realized I was one of the ugliest girls at school and probably wouldn't feel that sexual euphoria ever again. So I decided drugs would work. It wasn't until I was 22 that I finally had sex again. My younger brother had recently committed suicide, and we had a small service inside of my parents' house. He had this friend who looked almost like a carbon copy of Bryce. So I knew I had to have him. He was 14, like I said, I was 22, but I wasn't ashamed over my attraction towards the loser. The kid told me that he wanted to kill himself because he had felt guilty for not being there enough for my brother. I told him that suicide was gay and that he would become gay if he killed himself. Really? He questioned. Yeah, I responded. All the homosexuals commit suicide because God and society hate them. My brother was a faggot, so he put a plastic bag over his head and jumped out of his bedroom window. It's too bad that he's in the seventh circle of hell for all of eternity. The kid didn't feel any better, but then I offered him money and told him I would make him straight forever. Really? He questioned. Yeah, I said. So we texted for a while so that he could gain some sense of trust in me, whatever that means, before having sex with me. Then he came over and I took his virginity. He said while clenching the cash that I molested or raped him, but he couldn't decide on which one. Guess he was afraid when I told him to urinate in my mouth and choke me out. Plus I told him if he ever told anyone, I would castrate him and bulldoze my fist so far up his ass that he wouldn't be able to that I would pull his heart out. Listen, I know this is probably written horribly, but I cleaned 4 bags before I started writing this, and I'm planning on taking 10 tonight, so I'm never going to have the time to put this under a final draft. I'm going to end my life because I've finally done something that has terrified me. Something unforgivable, something that's impossible to rectify. And the worst part about it all is that I'm still going through with it, even allowing myself to ruin someone's life. For the past few years, I've exposed hundreds of pictures of guys I've webcammed with, which is already inexcusable. What I've done and what I'm going to do tops that to the zenith fucking degree. I thought you should know that. Bryce was resurrected again in the form of a penis as an avatar in a hookup app. This kid, who I'll call Nobody to protect my name for as long as I can, wasn't mentally defective or an innocent Catholic boy, but that mental illness was there. He's a schizophrenic, a victim of sexual abuse, and is currently being abused by his equally worthless mother. Nobody was the embodiment of my brother. Nobody was the embodiment of Bryce. I was the embodiment of some dead pop star that he was obsessed over. Somewhere in Nobody's eyes, I had seen the parachutes shimmying, but I could tell that all he could see in mine was a carry-on piece of rotting shit. I told him to fuck me maliciously, and so he did. I told him I wanted him to become my brother, and so he dressed like him for me. I even dyed his hair blonde in the shower. Even with the dope running through my blood, I can admit that I was beyond wrong, but then I allowed myself to go further. I did something so fucked up that I can't even write about it in my suicide note, but I'm sure you'll know soon enough. I'm masturbating off and on while writing this now. He's coming to visit me soon, so I'll probably let him penetrate me one last time before I cut his throat and relieve him of his misery. The videos and pictures will be released soon enough so that the catastrophe and humiliation can forever live on. I wasn't able to write another book to dedicate to my dead brother, but I think that this story will live on for eternity. Maybe it's not the expected tribute that my brother deserves, but it's the honest truth. Nothing is ever so complex, unblemished, and merciful. Never. And that's it.
Wow, holy fucking shit. That
Wow.
was a fucking roller coaster ride. No,
Yeah.
whenever you read from Fucked Up, I get more and more anxious to actually read it myself because
Me too.
everything you've read so far has been, on the one hand, like fucking hilarious, on the other, like pornographic, and on the third, somehow like tragic and profound. And like all the best fiction somehow intermingles those 3 things. And yeah, holy fucking shit, man. Holy fucking shit.
Yeah, the book is an orgy. It's like, it's a feast. It's just you're gonna want to like really shove your face in there. It's awesome.
I can't wait to get my hand on this book, and I just like to say I like how lyrical the prose is, but at the same time really fucked up, almost like a fucked up like bizarro version of Wheatus's Teenage Dirtbag or some like weird shit. Like it's just so it flows together so well, and it's so it's a ride every time, and I really want to get my hands on it. So
It's got a lot of stuff reflected in it, you know. Like there's a lot in there. Anyway. Yeah,
right, well,
Damien,
thank
you
you.
wrote that like a few years ago, right? You finished that like when you were 23, 22?
Yeah, 22 to 23.
Jesus.
wow.
Oh God. Okay. Wow. No, holy shit. I wish when I was in my early 20s, it was all like, oh yeah, I'm going to write this thing someday. And if I'd write a page or something and then I'd fucking forget about it. To have completed like something of that scope at 22 is fucking wild.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, it freaks me out that I'm 27.
Well, I hope
That's
you don't put
amazing.
it into the left side of your trash icon. But yeah, thank you.
I think that's it for our scheduled readers, but if anyone else would like to read, we're going to do open mic now. And absolutely anyone who's here can offer if you'd like.
I got something.
Yeah, great, Jake.
Cool. Yeah.
And just if anyone else is interested in participating in the open mic, just say so in the chat. Rudy's going to watch the chat, and then after Jake reads, and we'll move on to the next one. Okay, it's all you.
Can everybody hear me all right?
Yeah, you sound great to me.
Okay, cool. This is currently untitled, so I don't have a title. Jack Blakehood was old and ready to be done with all of this horse shit. It's not that time had gone on for too long, but rather that he'd just seen too many faces fresh with hope. People in their 20s and early 30s who still had the dipshit notion that there was time left. Time to go somewhere or be something. The young always drape themselves in despair like costume jewelry, but only when the bones begin to ache and the doctors say there isn't anything left to be done do those gems and beads grow hot red. They sear through skin down into the meat until nerves no longer register pain, leaving you with only their weight. Jack was happy when the COVID lockdowns began. There was time alone, a break away from the obligation of the normal world. Time to think about when he was young and troubles felt like they hit hard but didn't actually leave craters. He threw himself into writing his story, a memoir. Day after day, he put words into paper. The months passed, and he looked up. He saw that his business had failed, shuttered and bankrupt, and that soon his house would follow. His memoir was nothing but an abandoned mine shaft, cold, stripped of all value, and occupied only by the corpses of jackrabbits and the coyotes unlucky enough to have chased them. A pointless hole that may be slightly interesting to some, but ultimately contained no gold. He understood the only way to salvage anything and be remembered was to let it end and let people witness. Videos of suicides weren't new. Years ago, there was Bud Dwyer and his nice shot. He stood there at the podium as the clunky old television cameras filmed him, pulling the revolver from a brown paper bag as a woman yelled, "No." The hammer cracked against the pin, the bang, the dark fountain flushing from his nose. Then there was Bjork Stalker, an attempted murderer, chubby and sweating, his face painted red and a gun in his mouth, taking several heaving breaths before blowing the best of himself away. Most recently, Jack saw a teenager live streaming from his bedroom, the voices of friends and classmates chattering on the video as he stared into the camera for a few minutes, rocking back and forth. He raised the barrel to his head, and the wall behind him was sprayed black with flesh and bone. There was the scream of a girl watching the stream, followed by the scream of the boy's mother who entered his room and found him there. Jack made his decision. He'd do it live on webcam while people were listening to the words he'd written. It was the only way they'd remember. Friday came, the night of a suicide, the night of a weekly Zoom meetup of writers, rejects, poets, and plagiarists, and Twitter personalities that orbited an underground alt-indie, or however you would otherwise say unknown, online magazine called Despair Safari. He figured that in some strange way he would be helping not only the magazine, but the other writers who would be immortalized. Some would go on to inflate their relationship with him, say they were closer than they were, their own fame and social capital growing from the association. Finally, someone would wish they'd have been his friend. The editor of Despair Safari, Bill Waraya, welcomed everyone to the stream and spoke a bit about the theme for the evening, which was Tuesday Sadness. He reasoned that everyone agreed that this would be a wonderful prompt for the work because being sad on a Tuesday is very different from a weekend sadness or even a late weekday sadness. You could feel the excitement ripple amongst the group as people began taking turns reading their week. First up were a couple of philosophy junkies. As usual, they read pieces with no real coherence that name-dropped philosophers no one had read or even heard of. It was just understood that if you heard a last name you didn't recognize come from one of them, it was the author of some obscure and impenetrable theory. Over the months the Zoom readings had been going, it had become apparent that the two philosophy junkies were in fact dueling each other in some weird way that only they understood. There were a couple of weeks in July when the group thought it was a contest of who could create the longest hyphenated descriptor, but it was determined that wasn't the case when one Friday they took turns reading what seemed to be mathematical algorithms at one another with the words therefore and as is acting as punctuation. Since then, they've opened every stream, and their time is largely used by people to say hello and talk in the text chat until the pair finished. Next, the group heard a piece about dumpster sex from Dolores, who always wrote about sex. She'd written about having sex in bathrooms, wigwams, porta potties, TJ Maxx changing rooms, bookstores, elementary schools, church pews, a day labor employment agency lobby, trains, both Amtrak and public transit in Chicago and New York, the base of 3 Confederate monuments, countless graveyards, a 1988 Chevy G20 cargo van with a 350 V8 engine and a limited slip differential with 410 gears, an IKEA in Tampa, Florida, 4 national parks, and 2 Canadian provinces. There was an ongoing betting pool for when she would finally write about having sex in an actual bedroom, and the pot had grown to over $400, which was more than any of them have ever made on their writing. When she read, everyone paid attention except Mike, who was not only Dolores's ex-boyfriend, but also the next person to read. He always wrote about drugs, and did so much in the same manner that Dolores wrote about sex. Instead of learning which sex act was performed and where, everyone got to hear about what drug he'd done and how much he did. Jack enjoyed figuring out which musical artists were the inspiration for each piece. The work ranged from dancing on the psychedelic fringes of Sgt. Pepper lyrics to so grossly Cobain that it damn near was theft, which wasn't the biggest issue people had with him. If you watched Dolores's camera feed as Mike read, you could see her eyes rolling as she waited to give backhanded commentary. I think I've heard that before, like it's from an album or something, Dolores would say. And Bill, the editor, would jump in, providing his usual peacekeeping and motivational take, hoping to avoid confrontation to make sure that everyone showed up next week. Yes, I agree, Dolores, he'd say. It's very familiar, like a part of you that you've known is there forever. Musical at its core and yet a new exploration. Very nice work. Thank you for sharing, Mike. Up's next is Simon. Simon, are you ready? A scrawny, dark-eyed boy filled the screen. His skin was wet paper pale, and his eyes were rusty from countless days of tears. Every week he wrote about his depression, loss of love, and his favorite topic, voids. Simon loved writing about voids, how they could be filled, what caused them, how much they consumed, and one time wrote about voids inside of voids that had voids in them, which no one really commented on except the philosophy junkies, and they couldn't agree on if it was a good piece or not. Jack fiddled with the revolver at his side as he listened to Simon's poem. And it seemed to start off the same as always, but soon changed. The words had weight. Jack felt them slide into his ears and wrap around his mind and then cascade down his neck, covering his body in a wave of sadness. This poem lacked all pretense. Cliches were absent. There was zero irony. Jack tried and failed to remember ever hearing a poem so moving. Everyone watched as small tears crawled from the corner of Simon's eyes. His words unraveled like mooring rope falling away from a dock, letting the poem go adrift as it finally came to an end. It was the perfect moment. Jack knew that following the poem, which was without a doubt the most heartbreaking piece of verse ever spoken into existence, that he wanted to shut off the lights forever. He knew that his own writing was pointless, a muffled scream, the lowly wail of a long-forgotten spirit. Simon leaned forward, placed the barrel of a shotgun under his chin, and said, "I'm sorry." His head split apart, leaving a twisted mass of red tentacles in a pile where his face used to be, as his body slumped back into his chair. For several seconds, the only sound was his blood pouring in splashes against the floor. A small chihuahua walked into the room and began licking at the pool of blood. Jack's skin flashed cold. The hair on his arm stood on end and his stomach turned. He swallowed back some bile as the reality of what he'd just witnessed cemented itself in his mind. The permanence of suicide, an act he had been only seconds away from committing himself, was there in front of him, and he was left in the aftermath. He took a deep breath and realized that in this moment, he had been robbed of his glory by that whiny little shit. Bill, the editor, chimed in. You know what I love about this piece? Is that the action following the words not only lend a severity to the poem, but the other way around, in that the act of suicide is somehow given more of almost a religious impact, perhaps a commentary on the Christ myth or, any number of supernatural connections to self-sacrifice, but also in terms of the long history of writers who have taken their own lives. It really speaks to me, and I think that's what really gives it a kind of multi-dimensional weight to the piece. Great job, really great job. Oh my God, that totally reminds me of this guy that killed himself after we fucked. That was great. Memory lane for sure, said Dolores. That was fucking trippy. Like the end of his neck almost looks like a fractal or whatever, Mike added. Up next is Jack. Jack, are you ready? Said Bill. Well, I was, but now, I was actually going to kill myself, but Simon got to read before me, so as usual. So now... Wow, that's really not cool, Jack. Like, Simon really opened himself up to us, and now you're trying to steal his thunder, said Dolores. Mike chuckled. Opened himself up. Let's be respectful, everyone, Bill snapped. No, really, look, I've got the gun here and everything, Jack said, holding up a revolver. I was going to read my piece and then shoot myself, but Simon's poem was so good, and then he got to it first. One of the philosophers interrupted. You're saying he stole your idea? It could just be a case of parallel thinking, the other replied. No way, too many connections. They're mutuals on Twitter, pretty sure they workshop stuff together, said the first. Dolores jumped in. So it was like a suicide pact? Oh my God, that's so hot. I've always wanted to fuck someone and then kill ourselves. Mike spoke up. Hey, remember that time we shot up and then the past is the past, Mike. I don't want to rehash our relationship, she said. Bill jumped in. Now, Mike, remember, we respect boundaries here. That goes for you too, Jack. If you didn't have anything written for tonight, you could have just, given us a heads up so I could have filled the slot with someone else. We all know you haven't written much lately, and what you've shared with us has been lackluster at best. So it's really not cool for you to effectively steal Simon's work because your creative well is dry. Dry and boring. He's like 40 years old or something, said Dolores. I didn't steal Simon's idea. He didn't fucking invent suicide, Jack said. Bill interjected. Whoa, Jack, look, this isn't the place for that kind of hostility. And frankly, we've all been talking for a while in the group chat. What group chat? Jack said. That's not important, Bill continued. We've been talking and we just weren't sure that you were a good fit for what we've got going on here based on your past contributions. And honestly, your outburst tonight helped make a difficult decision easier. I'm going to ask you to not join us again. Are you fucking serious? You're uninviting me? Jack's screen read, the host has removed you from this meeting. The end.
Holy shit.
Great.
Oh my God.
That laugh was
Sorry, I'm
amazing.
sorry.
Oh
I
my
was
God.
going to say something. Oh my God.
Wow.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Sorry. No, that was hilarious.
Don't be sorry.
I was laughing through the
Oh,
whole
maybe.
fucking
Oh,
thing.
no.
I'm
God Damn.
This is my first time here too. That blew my mind. That was amazing.
Yeah, Jake, you have incredible
That was
presence.
incredible. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Wow,
Yeah.
that was legendary. I love everything about
That
that.
was
Uh,
totally
Hey, can you read
outrageous.
like everything I write, please?
I can barely read everything that I write, so I'm sorry.
No, but
Man,
sorry.
I'm gonna let Bill take it away here, but let me just say that was totally Cobain in every way. That was metal as fuck.
Thank you.
No,
Yeah.
but even setting like all the meta shit aside, which was which was hilarious, but setting all the meta shit aside, that was a really fucking good piece. I mean, even if someone had read that without the context of knowing about our readings and stuff, like like the structure of it was beautiful because it gets progressively more hilarious, and then you have this moment of like completely profound and like serene truth, and then it gets hilarious again. So no, I fucking I don't know what to say. I sound like now it's very like it feels very meta to even being critiquing the work or commenting on the work because I see myself as the character but anyway, it was fucking hilarious. I loved it, man.
That was great.
Thank you.
I'm just glad I'm not Sam. I mean, holy shit.
Yeah, can I read my piece now?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
you're up.
Sorry.
You're up next.
On a mild September evening, the sky midway between blue and black, Sarah Phillips sat down at her computer and listened patiently at her desk to the voice of Jill Gurrea as she welcomed everyone to the weekly, really sad traversal periodical publication, Zoom Readings. She had an idea, a sort of meta concept about the Zoom reading itself. A story about a man who, essentially tired of the gray slog of office work, which ensured that his private passions of music and quote-unquote writing are so bracketed within his life that he finally decides to take a stand and take his life. It was a difficult concept for her to pull off. She wanted to poke fun at the various really sad traversal periodical publication regulars, such as Eric Albrecht, Carson Voller, and Scoot Schitz. She even had fake names made for each of these people, so thinly veiled that Eric, Carson, and Scoot would be able to tell that when Sarah's narrator spoke of a character named Eris, Dawson, or Scott, the narrator was actually talking about Eric, Carson, and Scoot. Sarah was very excited to tell this story. Her more recent reading hadn't gone off as well as she had hoped, and she thought that this type of meta commentary would bring some much needed levity to the typically sincere and sad and sometimes downright nasty, but necessarily nasty, content that was read at these Zoom readings. She decided to read for the open mic. She did this because it would be more spontaneous than allowing Jill to read over her piece and to curate its timing. The open mic made additional sense because this way Jill would be absolved of all responsibility for any possible offenses or misinterpretations of the piece on part of the readers that Sarah was portraying. Sarah immediately volunteered for the open mic. However, a friend from a small group chat volunteered as well. She allowed him to go first. His name was Jake Blakewood, hilariously changed in Sarah's story to Jake Blackwood. Blake began his story describing a man's depression and general attitude toward the youth. The first paragraph had this almost Proustian moment, a simile precipitating to metaphor, in which young people were described as draping themselves in despair, adorning themselves with it as if it were jewelry, which then burned through their skin, red hot. It was a beautiful move, one that she had rarely been able to pull off. As Blake read on, Sarah's stomach began to drop. Blake's story had characters with names that were suspiciously similar to her acquaintances in the really sad traversal periodical publication Zoom readings. Each time a name was read aloud, an unmuted giggle was heard. Sarah looked at the Zoom avatars in utter horror. Everyone was clearly laughing at or grinning stupidly at Blake's story. It was almost beat for beat the same as hers, and not only that, it was better and much funnier. His callouts were similar to hers, but more kind-hearted. She didn't have time to think about it farther and muted the reading to attempt one final, immediate, amphetamine-fueled 5-minute edit to her story. She unmuted halfway through the reading to hear Jill's praise of Blake. That was so funny. It was very dark, but really lighthearted, unquote. She turned the volume down and kept editing. She heard, quote, Sarah Phillips, halfway through editing the third paragraph. She began reading, confidently at first. Instead of being about a man who attempts suicide on a Zoom reading for an online literary journal, but gets beaten to the punch by one poet, her story would be about a man writing a story about a man who attempts suicide on a Zoom reading for an online literary journal, but gets beaten to the punch. The causa prima displaced by one level, essentially. As she approached the middle point of her story, improvisation became impossible. She attempted to break character and laugh, but that moment was quickly replaced by a low, anxious moan she breathed out with each expanding pause. She bowed to the camera, silenced it, and muted the Zoom chat. The curtain fell. Finish.
You guys are going to fucking kill me. So,
Wow.
was this coordinated?
It totally was. Jake totally was coordinated.
Yeah.
Oh my god! How
Nice.
how many of how many more of you have pieces?
Dawson, do you have one?
I thought about it, but no, I don't. I'm sorry.
I told Dawson he should write one about voids.
Oh god!
Oh boy.
Oh my god! That was incredible.
That is amazing.
Oh my god! You're definitely taking the Zoom reading art form to a new meta level. Holy shit! I am literally going to fucking die here.
What? How many? What?
Oh god, Rudy, who's up?
Christ.
Who's up next?
This makes me glad that I don't do drugs and I just drink.
I mean, I just drank, dude.
Looks like Daniel is up next.
Okay, Daniel?
Yeah.
Cool, it's all yours.
Okay. This is a short story called The Fibers. It's about Morgellons disease. I don't know if you know about that. It's where you think
Oh my.
there's tiny fibers in your skin. So here it goes. This is called The Fibers. It's there, but I can only see it after looking at it for a long time, but it's definitely there. It's a sort of ragged, reddish or burgundy color, and only after looking at it for a very long time and like letting my eyes unfocus, I can see it, so it's there. It's really there though, but it takes such a long time for me to see it that even if it's really there, I question it being there in the first place. Because I think it's really, is it really there, or is it there because it's taking so long to see it or look for it? I mean, like a trick of the eyes. But after looking at it for such a long time, I was sure it was there, so I touched it. Or I reached out to touch it, then hesitated. What if even after looking at it for such a long time and being convinced it was there, it wasn't really there at all? So I pulled back a bit, again, uncertainly, uncertain if it was really there even at all. But after a while, I had to touch it, whether it was there or not, because there was really nothing else to do at all in the room. So I touched it, and it was definitely there. At first, I could hardly feel it because it was so soft. But then I did it again and could feel that it was really there. So I scraped away at it a little bit. But it was still there, like nothing had happened. The more I looked at it there, the more I could see it was all reddish or burgundy colored, inside it, I mean, because there was a lot of red around the outside of the sore. But no matter where it was or how it was inside, once you saw it, there was definitely a sort of reddish or burgundy color, like wine, perhaps. But it was certainly there, and you can see it after looking at there long enough. It was like a string or a fiber. So I sort of said, it's like a string or a fiber there in the middle of it, inside, because I was certain after looking at it for so long that it was a sort of reddish or burgundy fiber inside of it all. So after doing so, I said, there's a kind of fiber in there, like reddish or burgundy. They all looked for a long time, and one said after looking at it for an even longer time than myself, it isn't really there at all, though. And after saying this, he crossed his arms and leaned back, if you can believe it, like it wasn't even there at all. I was greatly upset because it really was there. I knew it was. Anybody could see it was really there once they'd had a proper look at it. So I said, but maybe you need to look at it a long time, even longer. And they said, no, I looked at it for a long time and it isn't really there at all. I can see and there's nothing inside it at all. But what about you? I asked another who'd been standing behind in silence. And he said, well, not really, no. No what? I asked. It isn't even there at all, he said. But it is there, I replied. You can see it inside there. Look, it's right here, I said, a sort of reddish or burgundy. But no, he said, I don't think it's really there at all. So for everyone else but me, it was like it wasn't even really there at all. Even if they had looked at it for a long time, even though they looked at it for as long as I did and even longer, when they touched it, it was like nothing had happened at all. Like it wasn't even there. I tried to convince them that if they'd only look a little longer, they'd see that it was really there. I tried to convince them that if they'd only look a little longer, they'd see some sort of reddish or burgundy colored fiber poking out just inside a little from inside the sore. I held it up into the light, thrust it forward to them, pleading, but each one simply shook their head, saying, almost to themselves more than me, as they filed out one by one, we just don't see it. It isn't really there at all. they've given me a set of tweezers, so convinced they are of the lack of there being anything there that they left them right in front of us. We picked them up off the bed, then fumbling, placed them between our fingers and sort of dig inside of it a bit to find the fibers or whatever's there. We can see it, a sort of reddish or burgundy that's right inside, right in the middle of it. On the outside, it's still red and sort of flaky, not fully healed, sort of red and dry and flaky, making it sort of tender there on the border of the scab or sore or whatever have you. But the tweezers have no problem locating the fibers once we place them inside it. How blind these idiots are that they can't even see that there's really something there. Perhaps one or two of them need to get their eyes checked, but really it's right there. I ease it out onto the bedspread with the tweezers and it flakes apart into little pieces right there in front of us. A reddish or burgundy sort of color all flaked out onto the bed in the light for all to see. If we could only pull forth something more substantial, perhaps a longer fiber, intact that didn't crumble, they give me a jar to collect the samples. They promised to send it out for analysis, but due to the lack of agreement on there being anything there in the first place, I'm reluctant to take them at their word. I've managed to extract a more substantial specimen, a fiber. It definitely bears a sort of reddish or burgundy color, the same it's had since the onset of our illness. Even more so when one looks at it closely under the light, this, now, they can't deny. It's there. For the past several hours, we've teased it out from in between the affected areas slowly. Fragile as the fibers are, I've had to extract them very slowly, teasing them out from inside a centimeter at a time. I've remained completely still. Once I've extracted a sizable length, there will be no doubt that I've been afflicted. They won't be able to deny it. Then, once only they realize that there's really something there, can the healing begin. It's these things I keep repeating over and over again, the sores and the fibers that are making everything so painful. If you only looked for a long enough time, you'd see they're really definitely there, all reddish and sort of burgundy. Dedicate an hour or two to focus on what's there in front of you, on your patient, your comrade, your once friend. At times it feels as if they're filling my whole body up, the fibers I mean, that they're nearly bursting forth, as if our affliction was more blessing than curse, a sort of brimming over. I'm not possessed, I am dispossessed, having been robbed of the legitimacy of the afflicted. Can you not see it? I ask again in a voice as hoarse as a whisper. A nurse has just entered to change the linen. Can you not see it's there? But no, she neither looks nor answers, content with the heavy silence the room might please bed down upon. At one point, she brushes away the flakes on the bed in front of us with the back of her hand and a look of disgust, as if there were crushed bed bugs, as if they were really there. See, I screamed, they're right there. She simply looks and says nothing, then retreats to the safety of the room's exterior. Now they no longer bother to enter, those colleagues who I'm trying to convince. But I continue to speak to them as if they too are there, right beside me. I say colleagues, for are we not both dedicated to the search for truth? I, to prove that something's really there in yourselves, for some broader form of study, myself perhaps. Please use my affliction as an example to help others see the interior truth. Our food enters each day through a tiny chute in the wall over near where they tied our first fibers we extracted. There, next to the doorknob, is a sort of steel or grayish nail or screw. It's there where we were able to find some sort of answer, or something more substantial rather. It's a sort of steel nail or screw, head poking out. Once we located it, after some hours, we managed to extract a substantial fiber, enough to carefully tie around the protruding nail or screw head, enough to begin slowly pulling it out of ourselves. Anchored there in the corner we begin to sort of pull it out of ourselves, much like one would say a rogue thread in a piece of clothing. Look, now you can really see it, spread out there from the corner across the ceiling with the rest of them. Look up there and you can see them all crossing themselves, glinting a reddish burgundy, almost orange, in the fluorescent light from high above. Upon closer inspection, for we have the time, there appear to be various steel gray screw heads located throughout the room. These we've used to create a sort of web out of the fibers. It's actually quite beautiful, even in desperation. They can't deny it's there now. Are they really watching? The way it sways up there? You can see it, like when food comes and there's a momentary movement, even the slightest, it undulates like a web in a soft breeze. We pass the time with a sort of stillness, looking between it, the web, and how even now, even still after so much time and effort, it's there, connected to us. How beautiful, we think, that it's really there inside and out. Spun and woven, a net to catch the light, illuminated. It's there, even if there's nobody to see it but us. Our affliction glints, another sort of pleading. What about here? An anonymous man with anonymous features points to the room. Wasn't there something there, he says? His colleagues appear at his side. No, one says. There's nothing there at all. But wasn't there something in there, I mean? His colleagues line up behind him, forming a line that extends down the hallway. I'm sure there was something here, the man says. Another pushes his way to the front of the line and speaks loudly in a clear voice. Well, to be sure if there is something there or not, shouldn't we open it? This elicits grunts of agreement that echo down the line. Open it, you say, the first man says. Yes, perhaps you're right. Perhaps that's the only way we'll be able to know for certain if something's really there or not. But maybe, another voice pipes in, we can see if something's really there by looking through the window. The first man says, a capital idea. The man then approaches the door more closely and unfastens the latch from a white metal flap covering the window. He peers inside. He clears his throat, then says loudly, There's really nothing there. Really? Shouts an anonymous person from the back of the line. Is there really nothing there at all? The man shouts again. Yes, it doesn't seem like there's anything here. Was there something at one point? What was there then? Someone else shouts. I'm asking if there used to be anything there. The first man says a little louder. He raises his voice. Does anyone remember there being anything there at one point? This elicits another series of exclamations down the line. Then a tepid silence. Well, perhaps let's take a look inside then. Is that the key there? A voice interjects. The first man held the key up, which glints briefly in the fluorescent light of the hallway. Yes, I've got the key right here. Shall I open it? Grunts of agreement echo and bounce off the walls. The first man makes his way slowly to the door. But what if there's really something in there? Someone shouts. What if it's dangerous? The first man pauses briefly, then waves his hand through the air and inserts the key in the lock, turns the knob and enters. The rest of them in the hallway squeeze behind him for a look and push him gently through the doorway into the room. See, there's nothing here. There's nothing there. Are you certain? Another one pushes through his way through the crowd and enters the room, standing behind the first. I could have sworn there was something in there. The first gestures theatrically towards the empty room in front of them. See, there's nothing in there. Nothing really at all, save for a few burnt out light bulbs and a single dirty bed. The second man gazes, looking from one corner to another. He begins nodding in agreement, but stops suddenly. His eyes squint. But what about that there? He says to the first man. Over there in the corner, there's something there. The first man squints as well, then walks over to the corner. Yes, you're right. What is it? He says. It's like a smear or flakes or something, the other one says, bending down. It's a sort of reddish or burgundy color. The first man squats to inspect it. But it's really nothing, isn't it? But there's definitely something there, the other man says. Yes, but not like we thought. No, not like we thought, the other agrees. But you can see it's there, can't you? A sort of reddish or burgundy color, like wine or dried blood. But it's really nothing, the first one says. I suppose not. There's really nothing there at all. That's it.
I'm sorry, excuse me. First of all, I really enjoyed your delivery, especially in the first part. Like, you really captured perfectly that, like, manner of speaking. Like, when you encounter someone who's a little nuts and they want to tell you exactly how they're a little nuts, like, you perfectly captured that sort of rambling manner of speaking about how nuts you are. But also, like, just like, that was some serious body horror shit.
Yeah.
And it was great. It was great.
I really like the description of the crush. What that was. Okay.
So, I think Rudy, who's up next? I know I saw Dawson in the chat, wanted to read. Do we have anyone else?
Oh, I must have missed Dawson because I was disconnected. But
Yeah, I think it
I
was.
didn't
I
see
think it was
anybody
when you
else.
DC'd. Yeah. Good.
I think there was someone before me, but I'm not sure.
Sorry. Did anyone else volunteer before Dawson? I don't think so. I think you're up next. If someone else does want to read, just put something in the chat and we'll get to you next. So.
All right. Should I just get started then?
Sure. Yeah. Take it away.
All right. This is on Expat. It's called What Boys Do. Lauren woke up alone. Her husband Frank had left, as he did every weekday, without saying goodbye. He had silenced his 5:50 a.m. alarm, showered, dressed, and left. Frank was the vice president of dealer sales at the local branch of Second Civic National Bank. He never talked about what he did there, and she never asked. It was a place as distant from Lauren as the jungles of Borneo. More distant. She had at least seen pictures of Borneo. Lauren crawled out of bed and into the bathroom. She knelt before the toilet and was sick. She brushed her teeth without looking in the mirror. There are prettier things to look at, she told herself. The claw-footed bathtub, for instance, with its glimmering gold faucet always dripping water no matter what Frank did to it. The white-tiled walls still glistening with condensation from Frank's 120-degree shower. All these Victorian details and more had been enumerated in the listing when they purchased the house 3 years ago. What if we offered you 5 fireplaces, 3 bedrooms, and over 4,000 square feet worth of Ohio history for just $89,000? It asked. It's hard to believe, but this majestic Zanesville house is the real thing. Enjoy the charming porch, or peek inside for a glance at the magnificent mahogany staircase. It went on and on about the intricate woodwork and historical hardware. It really had been a steal for the price, especially on a vice president of dealer sales salary. She spit the vomit-flecked toothpaste into the sink. Lauren returned to the bedroom and pulled a robe on over her pajamas before sitting down in bed and forcing one swollen foot, then the other, into her pink slippers. She wound her way through a twisting labyrinth of garishly wallpapered rooms and dark parlors, past heavily curtained windows and cavernous fireplaces, until finally coming to the front door. She stepped out onto the porch and went down to the mailbox, surveying the street as she walked. The leaves on the trees were already beginning to change and fall, but the houses behind them had been kept in historically accurate stasis for nearly 150 years, and Lauren thought would probably stay exactly the same for the next 150. As she pulled the newspaper from the mailbox, a breeze blew down the street, rustling the leaves and catching her bathrobe. Had this happened 6 months ago, the scene would have been fit for the cover of an old Ace paperback. The fallen leaves, red, yellow, and brown, skittering down the cracked asphalt as the wind plays in her curly black hair and makes her robe billow out behind her, hinting at the girlish figure that lay beneath it. Her stately home rising up ominously in the background, all gray stone and red velvet siding. But as it was, Lauren was a far cry from one of those pale dime store damsels. Her robe billowed out behind her, but the 25 extra pounds that came with the pregnancy had blurred her once waif-like figure, distending her stomach and swelling her breasts and thighs to nearly twice their original size. She pulled her not quite diaphanous bathrobe tight against herself. All these changes disgusted her, but Frank seemed happy enough with them. Lauren tried not to think about that too much as she turned back towards her home, clutching the newspaper to her chest. As she drew nearer to the porch, Lauren was not at all surprised to see a man sitting in her glider smoking a cigarette. A sense of unreality had been steadily creeping in at the edges of her life in the months since she had watched the little red plus sign bloom like a calla lily on her pregnancy test. Doors Lauren was sure she had closed would be found hanging open, lights would turn off and on their own accord, and then there was the sound, always the sound. At all hours of the day, just at the edge of her hearing, Lauren could hear a metal grating sound like a pair of rusty scissors opening and closing. It was a sound that conjured up images of hospital rooms and somber-looking doctors, faded memories of teenage trips to the clinic, trips she took long before she had ever met Frank. Your imagination's getting to be as big as the baby, Frank always said when she tried to tell him about the strangeness. Frank would laugh at his own joke, and then he would turn on the television and forget everything Lauren had said. He loves cops. But she knew what she had seen, what she had heard. So really, the man sitting on her porch seemed like a perfectly natural part of her domestic reality, the reality she no longer bothered to share with her husband. And didn't the stranger look like he belonged there more than she did anyway? Slowly rocking back and forth in the glider, wearing suspenders and dress pants over a white button-down shirt, the man seemed to be nothing more than another piece of historical hardware, as much a part of the house as the hinges and nails that held it together. Jesus, didn't expect you'd be here so soon, he said between quick drags on his cigarette. We still got another girl in there, but you're welcome to go in and wait in the parlor till Ruth gets her patched up and ready to go. She almost didn't notice the blood on his cuffs. Lauren stood staring at the man that had inexplicably materialized on her porch for a moment, unsure if she should fish her phone out from the pocket of her robe and call Frank. And say what, she thought, that there's a man on the porch smoking a cigarette? She could imagine what he would say about not calling him at work unless it was an emergency she couldn't handle on her own, about her goddamned imagination, about who put the fucking food on the table. Go on, go in, you're expected, the stranger told her, pulling her back to the porch. Then, as if in a dream, Lauren did as she was told and crossed the threshold into her home. Despite the peculiarity suggested by the sudden appearance of the stranger outside, the foyer was exactly as she left it not 5 minutes before when she walked out to get the paper. The dark wood of the staircase still climbed up and up to the second floor, the chandeliers still hung down from golden chains, and the wallpaper held its dizzying crimson damask pattern. Her home was just immutable as her neighbors, inside and out. It suddenly became difficult for Lauren to believe that the man on her porch was real. Absently, she sat the newspaper on a table in the entryway. She was proud of herself for not calling Frank. But before these thoughts could take hold in her mind, the door at the head of the stairs swung slowly inward and two women stepped out onto the landing. One, a willowy blonde, was leading the other, seemingly unable to support herself. The other, for her part, was a powerfully built brunette. Even from the foot of the stairs, Lauren perceived a strange and severe strength in the woman's plain features. Careful, careful, the brunette said to the blonde as they began to descend the stairs. You're going to have to take it easy for the next few days. I know, thank you, the blonde replied. Oh, hello, the brunette said, shifting her attention to Laura. Did Will let you in? Yes, he did, Lauren said. I'll be with you in a minute. I'm going to walk this young woman to her ride. Lauren nodded that she understood, and the two women walked by her on the way out to the door. As they passed, Lauren felt a shiver go down her spine, the kind of shiver she only got after barely clearing an intersection, or when she stopped just short of hitting a deer on some dark country road, the kind of shiver that let her know that death had been close at hand and was only now narrowly avoided. The baby stirred inside her. The brunette returned and asked Lauren her name. Unless you don't want to give it. Plenty of girls don't, and I don't blame them, she said. Why wouldn't I tell you my name? You're a little too old to be that naive. The insult once again reminded Lauren of her situation, talking to people, or things that looked like people at any rate, that probably weren't really there. If you're going to go along with their charade to enable their existence with her belief, they could at least be polite. My name is Lauren, and I don't appreciate. At that moment, the man from the porch, Will, was it? Came in from outside saying, "She's in rough shape, Ruth. Did you give her anything for pain?" "We'd be in enough trouble if anybody found out about us as it is," Ruth said. "You really want to add opium to the list of charges?" Will was silent. "Whatever your name is, we know why you're here. We understand your position. Let's all go upstairs and we can get started," Ruth said to Lauren, taking her by the hand and leading her up the steps towards her bedroom. Lauren, once again under the spell of this bizarre masquerade, did not resist. Will followed close behind. "Lay down," Ruth instructed Lauren. She did as she was told and laid down in the bed that she and Frank had shared for the last 3 years. Ruth grabbed a bag Lauren had never seen before off the rich oak dresser that stood in the far corner of the bedroom. "This is what boys do," Ruth said, pointing to Lauren's belly. "They have their fun and then leave us to deal with their mess." Ruth began producing a collection of evil-looking tools from her bag and placed them on the nightstand as she spoke. Miniature shepherd's hooks all covered in barbs and teeth, a variety of clawed forceps, and several speculums that looked more like can openers than anything that should be in an operating room. Ruth tested the forceps, and they made a sound like a pair of rusty scissors opening and closing. Suddenly, Lauren understood. "Shh, shh, it'll be all right," Lauren half heard Ruth say as Will held the chemical smelling rag over Lauren's face and the ceiling began to crawl above her. Her thoughts began to drift, and soon her eyes fluttered shut and she let herself slip into the black void that had slowly begun to eat away at the edges of her vision. Lauren woke up alone. She turned her head from left to right, searching for Ruth and Will, finding neither. The ceiling must have exhausted itself while she slept, for it was now again at rest. For a moment, Lauren was no longer convinced that she had even left the bed for that day. The paper was still in the mailbox. The stranger was never on her porch. Dimly, Lauren became aware that her sheets were damp with blood. She sat up and saw the battered, unnameable thing laying between her legs. Pulled into the world too soon, its tiny head had been crushed like some kind of grotesque Fabergé egg, spilling the yolk of its brain onto the bed in a blue-gray puddle. The veins beneath its translucent skin had ruptured, painting its entire body a sickly pale shade of red and casting its intestines in stark relief against the background of the blackened mesentery tissue. Lauren screamed into the emptiness of the house. When Frank came home that night, the paper was in the foyer waiting for him. And that's the
Legendary piece. Thank you for reading
Yes,
it.
it is.
Oh, thank you for
Absolutely.
publishing it.
Oh yeah, that was when I first discovered Dawson. It was so good. I mean, the theme, obviously, like, you know, in horror, it's a theme I've played with. Pregnancy is such a scary thing. But yeah, no, I mean, I think that piece is just perfect. I was really, it came out of nowhere and I was so psyched to publish it.
Well, thank you very
I
much.
like expat people because they're not scared of blood.
Yeah, no, that
Quavering delivery too, very chilling.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, no, Phantom Abortion Clinic is such a, like, Phantom Back Alley Abortion Clinic is like such a magnificent concept for a horror story. And I love the way this piece is structured because, like, it just like any good piece of horror, you're a few steps ahead of the protagonist, but a few steps behind the writer. So you're always like, oh shit. And no, it's just conceptually such a great idea.
Well, thank you very much.
Rudy, who's up next? I know Eris and Alexandrine. I'm not sure who we have in the queue.
Oh, I think Alexandrine is up next.
Alexandrine. Okay. Alexandrine, it's all you.
Sweet.
What's up, y'all? I haven't read the Coyote piece yet, have I? That one doesn't sound familiar, William?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. I keep losing track of like what I've read and what I haven't. Okay. This one was in Maudlin House. Saint never had a lot of luck, but then again, who does? Mall food court. She was asking this manager for a job, a man with an eyebrow ring and a University of Kentucky tattoo. Says here you worked at Toyota, said the manager. Why'd you quit a job like that? Circumstances, said Saint. Smoked since the age of 12 and sounded like it. They must have paid you well. Something like 19 an hour. Can't offer you more than $7.25 here. Minimum wage. Got to drag yourself up in retail, babe. 3 missed calls from Molly already. She called too much on account of withdrawal-induced anxiety. I'm aware. You don't smile much, do you? Not a lot of personality? He glanced down at Saint's personality. 2 B cups worth in a Walmart bra that pinched when she twisted the wrong way. Grotesque. Easy to be proud, easier to walk out. But the world ain't got much time left on it, and after all she'd done to keep them both alive, she'd be damned if she and Molly spent the last days under a bridge. Saint leaned over and did the most she could with her V-neck tee. She lifted the corners of her mouth. I smiled just fine. The locals, the ones whose ancestors came over from Germany and floated down the river and settled this town and had streets and hospital wings with their distant cousin's name on them, they called it the Dead God. Looked like somebody shot the world's biggest coyote or maybe a husky and threw it into the Ohio. The space where its guts ought to be all jammed full of trash and scrap metal. Smelled like the chemical farts coming out of the polymer factory. Smelled like scorched engine oil and gasoline. Smelled like the river. What everyone said was that if you saw it, your number was up. Get right with the Lord, don't cross the street, load up every gun you had because something out there was looking to kill you. Might be years, but it'll get you, and it won't be peaceful. It'll be a heart attack while you're driving, so you'll go head on into a semi, or you'll get your arm stuck in the wood chipper and bleed out before the ambulance can even be called, or maybe you'd go hunting and just not come back. Saint was 9 the first time she saw the Dead God. That's why Saint had 2 Glocks, a shotgun, and an AR-15 stashed in hidden panels where Molly couldn't find them. Why she had MREs and blankets and fresh water and purification tablets in the trunk of the car. Why she'd taken archaeology and history and intro to composition and wanted to enter the 7-year combined MS, PhD in theology with a concentration in applied eschatology at Yale University. But eschatology doesn't pay, and then Molly showed up. Saint affixed her halo, and the whole thing was forgotten. A trailer with a screen door and a loose hinge that slammed to shut behind Saint, and a Molly to sit on the couch and watch the television. That was all there really was in life. Got the job, said Saint, and she took off her hoodie. Her arms and shoulders were sun-browned, freckled. Molly twisted her head away from the television just enough to allow Saint to kiss her almost on the bottom lip. The place smelled like old coffee and the ashtray was overflowing. A can of Mountain Holler dangled precariously between Molly's thumb and forefinger. Saint walked into the kitchen, looked in the fridge for a 99-cent pound of ground beef. You ought to watch this, said Molly. It's called Relinquish. Invaders from an alternate universe. I don't like the manager. Kept staring at me. I didn't enjoy it. Liber Null. Meta-commentary. Real Italo-Calvino shit. You didn't defrost the meat, did you? It's surprisingly coherent. Invigorating. I've been questioning fate, wondering if it was always inevitable that I arrive here. If nothing happens in God's world by mistake, then am I to assume the actions leading one to desperately need a program of recovery might also be necessary in some way? Have I been punished or spared a worse fate? All this from a TV show. Streaming. The meat will cook the same frozen or not, and by the time I remembered it was too late, I figured it must have been going bad to go that cheap and would benefit from remaining frozen. Saint retrieved a brick of hamburger from the freezer and dropped it in a pan. She brought down the box of Signature Savor ground meat quick dinner kit and pretended to read the label. Molly lit another cigarette. One time when she was a child, Saint had wandered off from some kind of neighborhood event thing, a block party or ice cream social or barbecue, and walked down the street and in between a gap and a fence and found herself somewhere with dappled light in the buzzing summer heat, a place that could have been the woods just as easy as someone's backyard. She took off her shoes and felt grass under her toes, far less soft than she imagined or hoped it would be. She walked towards some kind of arch in the tree branches, hoping to cool off and be quiet, and sat in the roots. Something came at her slowly out of a place in the air. It looked kind of like a wolf, or at least the size of one. Really, though, it looked like a coyote, lean, long, this one iron gray. Sorry, that's my real dog.
Perfect timing there.
I know, right? Except it wasn't all gray, because part of its head and patches of its body didn't have any fur, skin, or meat on them, just bone. An empty eye socket with no flesh around it, just a jagged collection of screws and pins. But the one good eye was the kind of sick yellow orange no one can abide looking at for too long. Smelled like sewage and burnt plastic, gasoline. A child, said a voice that could only have come from the coyote thing. Such a human voice. Thought they'd have learned by now. The coyote thing circled in the dirt, dog-like, and sat down not far from Saint. There ain't much time left. Saint was too scared to move. Oh, it'll start here, right here. The world, any day now, she'll commence to dying. I wouldn't worry about it overmuch. Dying ain't so bad, and it sure as hell ain't the end. Things just kind of keep going. The coyote thing sniffed the air, like a dream. The store was called Nirvana, after the band or all the hippie shit they sold Saint would never know. Indoor-outdoor carpet and bare fluorescence. Not a dollar gone to waste on a curated shopping experience. Saint liked Nirvana just fine, she guessed. Unpopular opinion, but she liked Pearl Jam more. It was a local store, privately owned by the manager's uncle, a portent of doom if ever there was one. But once your mall starts putting in local institutions, can no longer support nationwide tenants, you're fucked. Might as well close the place down and move on out to St. Louis or maybe Denver, because the city ain't going to be livable much longer. The manager kept coming in to check on things, make sure the inventory was accounted for, check the take. He took a liking to Saint. You got potential, he'd say. You could go places in a town like this. At first, it was always that, something professional with a smile. You got potential. One day I see you running one of these, maybe down in Owensboro. You ever thought about a career in merchandising? I know the job ain't much, but it's an honest living and a chill vibe. You live alone? And eventually, once he cottoned on to who and what kind of person he was dealing with, he'd lean on the counter and stare out the door. A woman would walk by, jeans and boots, and he'd whistle and call over to Saint. Damn, you see that? A lot of fine women in the mall. He'd do it again and again over the hours he spent loitering in there, not technically on the schedule, but clearly bored. He'd say he was just enjoying the view. He'd bring up some kind of camaraderie as if they both shared an appetite. And it wasn't that Saint was immune to the charms of a woman's body. It was just that it didn't work quite the same way. It was quieter, warmer, ambient. She liked to think it was more respectful. That she and her kind took everything in at a glance, saw a whole person, how they flicked their hair, how they smiled with just enough crooked teeth, how they rested their weight on one leg or another, the way they held a glass or a knife or touched her shoulder. I know you can see them, the manager would say. Come on, just because you've got a girl at home don't mean you can't look. I've got a wife and she couldn't care less. We're only human. And Saint would look up and see some pre-pregnancy soccer mom, someone who looked like they didn't have any real idea of what it meant to work, somebody keeping her personality under layers of expectation, somebody who voted Republican and made audible twists of the face if you even mentioned touching someone else's vagina, and Saint would say, damn, she's fine, and go back to sorting out trays of tiny crystal rings. That manager came back today, said Saint. Creep. Molly nodded and turned her face just enough away from the screen so Saint could brush her lips with her own. I just started this show, Birth of a Murderer, she said. You seen it? Saint shook her head. She went to the freezer and took down 2 frozen Salisbury steak dinners, the dollar store kind. We're paying for all the services as is, said Molly. We really should be watching more new content, expand our horizons. My sponsor tells me to listen for the voice of God. Maybe she's in one of these shows and we just haven't found her yet. A hard worker can go far in an auto plant. Not a union job anymore, but nothing is. The neighbors, they're so busy hollering all hours of the day and night, they won't even notice or care when a butch gal slams her girlfriend up against the wall, fingers all over the place, and both of them making sounds ain't from the earth. Somebody can live well like that for a good long time. They can leave their family home at 21 and get 3 good years out of it before the dead god comes in to bring Armageddon down on the world, before their girlfriend's opioid use ramps up. He worries me, even though there ain't no reason for it, said Saint. She punched the buttons on the microwave. Somebody in the meeting today, they said that God is everywhere. Molly scratched at herself. Sounded like hippie bullshit to me. Pantheism, the coward's concept of God. It occurred to me that I wasted my time with college. I should have become a preacher. What a grift. Saint wanted a beer like nothing else, but all things considered, it wasn't possible to keep anything stronger than diet soda and Skoal wintergreen in the trailer. Sometimes Saint resented all that. She wasn't the one with the problems. She'd been drunk twice, once at a graduation party and once on her 21st birthday, when she'd snuck out and gone to the TikTok lounge after Molly fell asleep to shoot pool and just get away from the constant vigilance, the caretaking, the never-ending tears. Molly lit a cigarette. Indoor smoking was a concession Saint had made after Molly had gotten back from the court-ordered treatment. If I'd been a preacher, none of this would have happened. My daddy would have never found out, and I wouldn't have had to hide because nobody would pay attention to a couple ladies doing Bible study, and I could have moved to Portland and come out and done weddings for cute non-binary couples. Sometimes I wonder, said Saint, if you really aren't listening, or if you don't care, or if you think it's funny. What I take issue with most of all is predestination. If nothing happens in God's world by mistake, then the actions which drove me here were also planned. My recovery is predicated upon subsuming my own will and accepting God's, yet had he not driven me towards such choices, I would have no need for this. If you didn't start popping pills, you never come back to Indiana. The only satisfactory answer is that my choices were engineered in order to sabotage my own free will, a selfish drive by our Creator to bring me to heel. Don't get me wrong, I'm willing to accept the empirical evidence and to utilize these methods for as long as they prove effective, but I am being asked to essentially annihilate my own consciousness in order to stem the progression of my chemical dependency, and I find that deeply problematic. And you wouldn't have had to teach at that school. Whether or not I can hear you is irrelevant. Has it occurred to you that I am accustomed to a different sort of conversation, that maybe I'm not getting everything I need from 7 narcotics and or alcoholic-centric group meetings a week? Ask yourself how you feel about living here. Then imagine that you used to drink with Pulitzer winners, and now you can't even drink with the guy that scrawls filthy graffiti in the women's room. And you wouldn't have had to put up with me, said Saint. Her girlfriend's eyes welled up, and she leaned in and burst into tears all over the shoulders and chest of Saint's ratty old t-shirt. And Saint, by rote memory, by pure habit, stroked Molly's hair, told her how okay it was all going to be. You sure you're a lesbian? The manager's breath too close on her left side, a slow day, the old fear-stained question. Molly would define herself as queer in order to deconstruct and decolonialize the white, ciscentric, binary view of sexuality, and also because she fucked enough trans guys to get aroused by Old Spice. The old butch gals who occupied a corner of the local gay bar would have spat back in the affirmative without a moment's notice. Saint, she never really thought of it at all. Other people called her a lesbian. It was just how things had turned out. I don't know. Yes, she said. Which is it? If you don't know, then how can you say yes? He got even closer. They weren't touching. Together they rested on the edge of sexual harassment. Saint felt her stomach curdle and she pulled away. He stepped back, hands in the universal, okay, you got me gesture. Sorry, he wandered away, out towards the open door and into the mall. You ain't the only one with problems at home, sweetheart. She stared down at the paperwork. I'd kill for a beer. The bartender at TikTok was undeniably cute. Saint decided this under the influence of Budweiser No. 3. She drained the first one in 2 minutes, ravenous after months of someone else's sobriety, followed by another before settling in to kill this one slowly, sober up, and use mouthwash before going home. At the moment, however, the cuteness of the bartender was undeniable. Saint idly watched her larynx bob up and down, wondering about what it would be like to be with someone not born female, if it would matter, if she would care. 3 missed calls from Molly, a short text exchange, just enough to confirm a late arrival at the trailer to insinuate the presence of friends. The manager leaned over to Saint. You think that one's a tranny? To be alone, to not have to care for someone else or to ponder one's own doom. What a luxury it must be to not expect disaster so thoroughly that you have long since ceased to fear it. So easy to leave. Take the one beat-up old car and drive off, not even that far, to Indianapolis or Louisville. Get the same job in the same trailer, only with no falling apart girlfriend and no prophecies from rotting coyotes. Come on, don't tell me you aren't wondering, said the manager. His Pantera shirt, rebel flag displayed proudly. R.I.P. Dimebag. The smell of alcohol leaching out of someone. Garlic, mouthwash, Old Spice, gasoline. It smelled like danger. I've been wondering since the first day I came here, said Saint. And I feel bad for wondering, because some part of me feels like it ain't my business, and another part of me feels like I shouldn't even care to begin with. The bartender came by, just checking on their drinks, bringing them new ones, ready to ply them with shots. Saint smiled. Damn right you shouldn't care. The manager drained his Budweiser and started on the next. Designated driver usually means beer only. All the same in the dark, you know. Wouldn't be too far from a strap-on. Carbon levels rising. A new virus every year. I wrote this before COVID, fuck. Rising incidences of certain forms of substance abuse as people, flushed with panic, attempted to quiet the screams within. Famine, flood, fire. Saint wasn't sure how it would happen, but honestly, she could hardly believe it had taken this long. You think the world is going to end? Asked Saint. Don't need a prophet to see that. There was a kind of dead-end alcove by the bathroom. Saint didn't let him kiss her on the mouth. He wanted to take a stall, but she firmly vetoed. He clearly didn't understand what was happening. She let him touch her all over, as close to her breasts and crotch as he dared. He bent down and snuffled and licked her neck. He hiked up her leg and he hiked her up the wall and ground his gut and hips into her leg. Hadn't been touched like that in months, either of them. And with the world ending, a little drunken rub back and forth couldn't hurt. He was something grotesque and automaton, an unsexual being, and honestly, she knew he didn't quite understand what she was, something that appeared like a woman, but didn't move or act like one. The manager pulled away frustrated. Really? Sorry, ain't gotta wonder. I gotta piss, I'll take you home. Saint didn't pick the bartender because she probably would have asked if the bartender was a bottom and then fucked her regardless of the answer. Saint was already walking across the parking lot by the time the manager finished shaking himself. She'd taken the last Budweiser to go, sipping intermittently. She couldn't imagine the trailer. There wasn't anything there worth holding on to, just a stash of guns and ammo and all-weather fire starters and the person she loved most in the world. The street took a bend, and suddenly Saint realized she was walking through some kind of park or maybe a vacant lot or somebody's art project. It was all grass and weeds, but also concrete and dappled moonlight, far too bright for a waning crescent. She sat down on a stump and sipped more beer and waited. It came out like last time through a gap in the trees, but also the air. The stink of gasoline, exactly as rotten and dead as last time. The same weary but not unkind attitude. Saint said she figured time was up, that her oldest friend had come to take her away. The coyote thing cocked its head politely, waiting on her to elaborate. Isn't it time for the world to end? And not a moment too soon either. Come on, you bastard, don't keep me waiting. I've been waiting my whole life and nothing's come of it. The knowing, it's hell. They sat. Stars moved. A cell phone rang again and again. Can I sit another moment? Just a moment longer, and then get back to Molly and kiss her all over and go to a midnight meeting to McDonald's and not even order off the dollar menu and stay up with her and watch whatever. Only if I can just sit for a moment. There was no answer, just an eye, yellow and orange, the smell of slow-moving disease, the gentlest indication that nothing would ever be pure or good again, but that all would be well for everyone if only they could wait for things to take their course. That's it.
Wow. It's funny you say you wrote that before COVID, but that piece had like really powerful COVID vibes, you know, like that sensation of existing like at the end of the world, but also at like the end of a uniquely American version of the world, like that kind of desolate Midwest and the like very American folkloric vibe of the ghost coyote and everything. It really, I don't know, it really felt like this kind of like end of America story that feels very appropriate in the like moment that we're in, you know?
Yeah, that was the idea. I'm sorry it was so long. I didn't realize how long it was, but
No,
No, that was
Bye.
fantastic. I'm still kind of thinking about it.
Dollar store Salisbury steak, though, man.
say what?
It's a dollar store Salisbury steak.
Oh yeah. Oh, that'll get you through the day when you need it.
I mean, I was eating McDonald's earlier. Yeah.
Eris is up next, right, Rudy?
Yep.
Hey.
Eris, I hope you don't
Hello.
mind. While you're reading, I'm going to run to the bathroom. I drank
I am in the bathroom, so it's all
2
good.
cups
I mean,
of iced tea here, so I hope
okay.
you'll excuse me, but the floor is all yours.
Awesome. Okay, I'm not leaving. It's fine. Okay. What? I need to find the link again because I'm really smart. Okay, this is never mind. It's too awkward because I can hear someone else. Hey, can you stop talking about drug dealing? Okay, thank you. All right, so it's Elvis from my old, really, from my DeviantArt. Jesus, okay. I am going to publish. Okay, this is really short, so it's fine. I am going to publish all my poems. There will be about 50 books. Everyone will notice. Everyone will care. There will be a movement. Then I will fake my own death. Then everyone will really notice. Then everyone will really care. Because, now dead, they can see me in a different light. What was once accidental now is profound. What was once amateur is now precocious. I am so much deeper with the brain 6 feet under. Okay, keep in mind, this was just in response to Damien asking me to read shit from I wrote when I was 13. Publishers will rejoice. Poetry without the poet. They will make various minimalistic covers, and I'll be immortalized in hardcover. My first grade teacher will say she knew all along. But then I'll come back from the dead. I'll wake up. Come back from my hole underground, where I'd be chatting it up with Elvis and say to everyone, you were wrong. That theory was bullshit. That poem was about pancakes, not about gender inequality. I don't have daddy issues. And Freud and Princeton were wrong about that one line about that one thing. And you should have loved me while I was alive, when I could have talked back the first time. Not when I was dead. And you could say I meant whatever it is you wanted me to mean. And you were free to chew until flavor was all but lost. Because now, when I die for real, you never know when I might come back and correct you about that one line, about that one thing that only I can know the truth about. All right. Well, that is Eris's poetry, toilet time. Yeah, done.
I'm sorry, I missed like all of it. I really apologize.
It'll be even better when you see it, because I'm on my phone. Yeah.
Oh yeah, nice. Is that gonna be linked on to DeviantArt or something? We're gonna get to see it.
Oh yeah, Eris sent me the DeviantArt link earlier. Is it okay if I share it with everyone, or? Oh, Eris, do you mind
Cool,
if I
you share
drop
it.
the link in the chat? Oh, she's just still.
William, you should drop the link.
Okay, there you go.
Oh man.
DeviantArt.
Man, those were the days.
Wow, the site looks so much different now.
I know, it's like oddly sleek and modern. It's actually really upsetting. I don't know who would want DeviantArt to look like this.
The redesigning DeviantArt would be like redesigning like fucking all the old image boards or something. Like, why would you even do that? The clunkiness is part of the
4chan?
aesthetic. Yeah, like
Yeah.
they redesigned 4chan, right? You know, you go on X and it still looks like X or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I suppose maybe there are still like tens of thousands of people using DeviantArt then, if they felt the need to like overhaul the site for like modern sensibilities or whatever. But as someone
Be
who
good for
hasn't
them,
seen it
but
in 15 years, I don't know, it's weird. I think Rudy Hestia is up next, right?
Yep.
Okay, if it's okay, if it's two pieces, they're
Oh, absolutely.
both fairly short. Okay.
Absolutely.
So the first one is the last poem in this grouping. And then the next one is going to be the first one from this post.
Do you mind if I throw those up on Twitter just so people
Totally don't mind.
find them? Okay, great.
Okay, so this one's titled You Can't Be Any Worse Than My Scars. Drunk, I sit near comatose in a shitty bar, a booth for two shared between me and my ghost, drowning myself in whiskey and rum while chain smoking enough packs that the smoke clings to me with its hooks driven in. The cloud of smoke obscuring me in its embrace transforms me into a walking, smoldering bonfire, quite befitting for someone as broken as I. The stench of death that emanates from me is suffocating even for the smoke from my cigarettes. Wallowing in this cacophony of inadequacy is where I found myself when she enters my vision. As bright as a landscape painting modeled off of a sunny field of crops in the heat of the Midwest summer, her Xanax-shaped smile entrances me. I am trapped in her addictive gaze. She waltzes over to my booth and shoves my ghost aside, flinging it back into my body. I don't remember the exact pattern of her words, those hushed sweet nothings shared between strangers, but regardless, I found myself in her apartment. There isn't anything special about it, just another crumbling apartment in a sinking city. I go to ask her where the bathroom is, but before the words escape my maw, her lips are flushed to mine. You know where this goes from here. Imagine whatever you want to imagine, but that hour of daiquiri is meaningless. Besides that, it felt great. She clings on to me now, her head on my chest, arms wrapped around my torso. Maybe I deserve to rot in hell or languish in purgatory for what I've done. With sunrise approximately 10 years away, these moments of reprieve are what make life worth living. And then this next one is titled Ashes in Dew. Sometimes I try to think on my childhood. I realize that I don't really remember it at all. It's a dream at best, a nightmare at worst. All I can ever grasp are the blood trails of times lost. I know I lived. I hope I lived. But it is hard to justify an existence you can only remember the last 3 years of. Maybe there is something wrong with me. I'm not sure. All the ambiguity in my existence may be what spurred my rebirth through faith. Faint smoke trails floating in my brain. They only seem to solidify in my subconscious irreality, my restless nights. Flashbacks hit me like FIM-92 Stinger missiles hitting the exposed flesh of a helicopter, leaving nothing but entrails and rot. My life is a pilgrimage from unknown to known, disappearing like a morning fog. My childhood is but the vanishing ashes of a bonfire. Yeah.
As
That's it.
usual, oh, sorry. As usual, I love your poetry. I feel like you've read so many times that almost anything I would say is something that I've said a few times before. But I do love the like just complete like frankness of the pieces, like the very direct, unequivocal way that you capture emotion is really, really awesome. You know.
Sorry, it took me a second to respond. I was wrestling with my fan to keep it in the window because it's way too fucking hot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I felt like that might be a problem with how much I read. Is it like eventually the feedback just becomes the same, but I still enjoy doing the reading and like, I always enjoy how other people view the work and like analyze the style of it and stuff like that, because like I'm really bad at like looking back and doing that in reverse, so having other people be like, oh well, this is how it makes me feel is always really helpful.
No, it's really like inspiring how prolific you are. I've always kind of been like more galvanized by artists that just put stuff out, you know, almost like just unceremoniously. It's got like real energy behind it. And yeah, you can like notice like the changes, like when you get more interested in religious stuff, and your stuff kind of reminds me of like a, like I've said before, like Ellie Greenwich pop songs, but like with a lot of like Baroque, religious, intense war imagery and whatnot.
Oh yeah, the pop song comparison is really interesting, Manny. I never really thought of it that way, but now that you say that, like something just clicked in my head, and now I can't unsee it. You know? Yeah. Um. Oh. Rudy, do we have anyone else Oh, sorry. Sorry, Esky. I just saw you mute your mic.
No, it's okay. I was just gonna thank Manny because I never really thought of the pop song one either, but like, yeah, that is definitely I guess an unconscious influence in some ways, especially a lot more of that like 70s and 80s like gospel pop almost. I don't know the exact term for what it was, but I listen to things that are either from that period or take inspiration from that period a lot. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's leaked in.
Yeah, I mean, between the like unapologetic like religiosity of your work and like the fixation with like violence and also like pathologic like personal pathology, like mental pathology, you know what it reminds me of a lot? Kanye West. And you should take that as a compliment because Kanye is I really think perhaps the greatest living artist, period. But with the possible exception
Holy
of
shit,
Bob
that's
Dylan,
that is like there are two compliments that I have gotten here that are like permanently ingrained in my brain. That is one of them now. The other one is I read some stuff, some of the more religious stuff that was on Expat here once, and someone compared it to the first time they read Revelations, and those two compliments are like so. I don't even know what to say. Thank you. Fucking yeah, Kanye is a genius and probably the best living artist of our time.
yeah, no, thank you for reading, Hestia. Sorry, I am really tired. It has
Yes,
been a long
Kanye
night.
is.
Rudy, do we have anyone else? Or are we or is that it?
Nope, I think that's all of the queue.
Okay, given that it's 10:30 and we've been going for about 2.5 hours, I think I'll call it a night there as far as the reading is concerned. But as always, I'm going to keep the Zoom call up for a while for anyone who wants to stick around. So if you are watching this, if you're watching this on YouTube or on our website, maybe next time we do one of these things, you should drop by. We have readings every Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific. I think that's right. Yeah, so stop by at any point. These things are open to everyone. And thank you, everyone who came and read, whether it was our scheduled readers or people who read in the open mic. And thank you, Jake and Sam, because it's that was fantastic. It's funny because it kind of vaguely reminded me of something that Rudy and I might have pulled back in the day in some like obscure role-playing chat or something. I guess it's like the Joker thing or the Dark Knight thing. It's like you either die a troll or you live long enough to be the one who gets trolled. So that was great fun. So anyway,
No, that was
thank
awesome.
you guys.
That's a great way to put it.